Can you imagine being so completely broke that you'd actually consider letting a total stranger sleep on your living room floor just to make rent? It sounds like a nightmare, right? But for three guys in San Francisco, this wasn't a hypothetical. It was their actual reality. They were literally days away from being kicked onto the streets of the most expensive city in the world. We are talking about the kind of empty bank account stress that makes your stomach do flips. But instead of giving up, they came up with an idea so wild that it changed how the entire world travels forever. You guys aren't gonna believe how this all started. Enter our main characters, Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia. These two were design school grads with huge dreams but absolutely $0. The T on their financial situation was incredibly grim. They had moved to San Francisco to make their mark, but city rent prices were turning their big city dreams into a desperate struggle. The deadline for their next payment was looming like a dark cloud, and they were officially out of options. This was a full-blown, we are going to be homeless by Monday crisis. So what do you do when you're backed into a corner? Well, if you're Brian and Joe, you look around your sparsely furnished apartment and see opportunity where everyone else would just see a dusty floor. They didn't have a spare bedroom or even a pull-out sofa. What they did have, however, were 3 literal air mattresses stashed away. In a moment of pure desperation, they decided to blow those mattresses up, toss them right there on the living room floor, and call it a business. They dubbed it Air, Bed, and Breakfast. Seriously, can you imagine? Is this a legitimate business plan or just a heartbreaking cry for help? At the time, if you told any sane person you were going to charge people to sleep on an air mattress in your living room, they would have laughed you out of the room. It sounded like a college dorm nightmare, not the next billion-dollar tech startup. But then, fate stepped in. The massive industrial design conference was coming to town, and because San Francisco is a hub for these events, every single hotel room was booked solid. People were desperate for a place to stay, and our protagonists started seeing dollar signs. They whipped together a simple website offering a place to sleep and breakfast for any attendee who couldn't find a hotel. It was a take it or leave it kind of deal. Now, who were the people crazy enough to actually pay for this? Well, meet the original trio of guests who unknowingly stepped right into history. These 3 pioneers weren't just looking for a bargain, they were the first ones to trust the vision of 2 guys they'd never met. Imagine showing up to a random apartment, seeing an air mattress on the floor, and thinking, yeah, this is totally fine, here's my money. It was the start of a revolution, even if it felt sketchy at the time. And let's talk about that breakfast promise. We're talking about Pop-Tarts and orange juice, folks. It was the ultimate struggle meal served with entrepreneurship. But hey, it worked. By the end of that single weekend, they had managed to make $1,000. For 2 guys who couldn't pay their rent, that felt like winning the absolute lottery. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Even with that cash, wait until you hear why literally everyone, from friends to investors, thought they were absolutely insane. They were convinced that the idea of renting floor space to total strangers was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard. They were sure it would never work. They had no idea that this insane experiment was just the beginning of a global empire. But there were many hurdles left, and the struggle was only just beginning for our founding trio today. Now that they had that first $1,000, you'd think it was smooth sailing from there, right? Wrong. In fact, the struggle was only just beginning. While that initial weekend proved the concept, they needed a real team to turn this into a legit business. This is where the founding squad officially formed. And let me tell you, this bromance was the perfect mix of chaos and calculation. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia were the design gurus, but they needed someone who actually understood the back end of the internet. Enter Nathan Blakarczyk, the secret weapon. Nathan was an engineer and Brian's former roommate who brought the technical logic to the table. Think of it like this. Brian and Joe were the ones coming up with the wild artistic vision, while Nathan was the one making sure the website didn't crash every 5 minutes. Together, they were the ultimate trio, but even with their combined brain power, the rest of the world still wasn't buying it. I have to tell you, the T on the rejection files, because it is honestly painful to look back on. Can you imagine being the person who said no to a company that is now worth billions? Ouch. They went to dozens of high-profile investors in Silicon Valley, and the response was almost always the same: a hard pass. Some investors didn't even bother to reply to their emails. There's even a famous story about an investor who met them at a cafe and literally walked out halfway through his smoothie because he thought the idea was so ridiculous. They were asking for a tiny investment of $150,000 for 10% of the company. Today, that same stake would be worth billions. Seriously, talk about the ultimate missed opportunity. Everyone thought people staying in strangers' homes was creepy, unsafe, and just plain weird. The founders were being told to give up and get real jobs every single day. By mid-2008, they were drowning in debt. We're talking $40,000 in credit card debt across several cards. They were so broke, they were actually living on the leftover cereal they couldn't sell. But instead of quitting, they pulled off the most legendary hustle in tech history, the cereal box scheme. Since it was the 2008 election season, they decided to design and sell limited edition cereal boxes. They created Obama O's and Captain McCain's. They actually convinced a local printer to give them the boxes for free on credit and spent their nights hot gluing the cardboard together in their kitchen. They sold these boxes for $40 each as collector's items. It sounds totally random, but they actually made $30,000. That cereal money was literally the only thing keeping the company alive during its darkest days. This cereal hustle is actually what saved them when they applied to Y Combinator, the world's most famous startup accelerator. The founder, Paul Graham, didn't even like the Airbnb idea at first. He thought it was a disaster waiting to happen, but when he heard the story of the cereal boxes, he changed his mind instantly. He told them that if they could convince people to buy $40 cereal, they could probably convince them to do anything. He famously labeled them as cockroaches because they were impossible to kill and refused to die, no matter how bad things got. Is being compared to a bug a compliment? In the startup world, it's the ultimate badge of honor. It meant they had the grit to survive when everyone else would have folded. Even after getting into the program, the drama didn't stop. The original website looked like a relic from the 90s, and the struggle to build trust was real. They had to figure out how to make people feel safe sleeping in a stranger's bed. Was the world actually ready for this, or were they just one bad incident away from a total PR catastrophe? They were working 20 hours a day, even traveling to New York to personally take professional photos of the apartments just to make them look more inviting. They were doing everything manually, trying to spark a flame in a cold market, but just when they finally secured their first real round of funding and felt like they were winning, something happened that almost burned the whole company to the ground before it could truly go global. Wait until you hear about the guest from hell incident that nearly ended it all. That guest from hell incident, where an early host apartment was completely trashed, could have been the end. It was a PR nightmare that forced Brian, Joe, and Nathan to create a trust and safety team and introduce the 24-hour customer service we see today. But once they survived that storm, the transition was miraculous. 1 minute, people were whispering about how dangerous it was to let a stranger into your home, and the next, everyone was bragging about stays in cozy tree houses. The "you gross" factor started to melt away as the community-driven aspect took center stage. It wasn't just about a cheap bed, it was about the experience. The world realized that staying in a real neighborhood felt more authentic than a sterile hotel room. Then came the rise of the host influencers. It wasn't just Brian, Joe, and Nathan making money anymore. Ordinary people, teachers, and retirees suddenly realized they were sitting on a gold mine. Their spare bedrooms became cash cows. We started seeing hosts who treated their listings like 5-star boutiques, obsessing over thread counts and leaving handwritten notes. It became the new American dream. Some people were making more money from their rental properties than from their actual 9-to-5 jobs. Can you imagine paying off your entire mortgage just by letting travelers use your guest suite? It turned regular folks into entrepreneurs overnight, creating a new class of moguls. But wait, it gets even better. The brand went through a massive glow up. We moved far beyond those dusty air mattresses. Suddenly, the platform was hosting actual castles in Scotland, private islands, and even pop culture landmarks. Have you seen the Home Alone house or the Barbie Malibu dream house? Those weren't just listings, they were global marketing events that broke the internet. Celebrities started getting in on the action too, either as hosts or high-profile guests, making the brand synonymous with luxury and cool. On from a floor in an apartment to a literal palace. Talk about a glow up. It's wild that a company built on struggle meals now caters to the world's elite. Now, it hasn't all been sunshine. We have to talk about the controversy corner. As the company grew, it faced serious heat. You've probably heard the stories about hidden cameras or those insane cleaning fees that sometimes cost more than the night's stay. You know the ones, where the host asks you to scrub the floors but still charges $200 for cleaning. It's become a total meme. dream. Beyond the fees, there's the massive drama with local governments. Cities like New York and Paris have been fighting back, claiming that short-term rentals drive up housing prices. Is Airbnb the hero of the sharing economy or the villain of the housing market? So, what is the next big move for this giant? Rumors are swirling that they might be eyeing the aviation industry. Can you imagine an Airbnb branded flight? Or perhaps they'll come full circle and start building their own boutique hotels to compete with the very industry they tried to disrupt. They are clearly looking toward the luxury travel space, trying to make every part of your trip part of their massive ecosystem. They want to own the entire vacation experience from start to finish. It's a long way from selling cereal boxes in a cramped kitchen to stay afloat, isn't it? Looking back, it all comes down to one question. If you were back in 2007, would you have been one of those first 3 people to pay for an air mattress on a stranger's floor? Or would you have missed out on history because it sounded too crazy? It just goes to show that sometimes the most insane ideas change the world. Success often looks like a disaster until it doesn't. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the scandals and successes of the brands you use every day, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. Let us know what you think